Tonight, we're going to be talking a bit about consciousness and what that is all about. I have previously, we kind of brushed the surface of this when we had started the course and we had our little overview at the very beginning on our first day. Tonight, we're going to go more in depth regarding consciousness and exactly what that might be and what the theories are about it and how all that may work. So just for a little bit of review, let's look at it and think about what exactly, when we say consciousness, what exactly is that, or what do we mean by consciousness? Does anybody have any idea what consciousness might mean? Does someone want to take a stab at it?
Say it's basically just thought.
Thought? Okay, that's certainly a part of it. And when you say thought, what do you mean? Like, give me an example of that. Like, what would that look like?
Well, I'd say like there's kind of a differentiation between the unconscious and the conscious. So that's why I associate thought more with consciousness, is because you're actively, or at least you can like perceive yourself thinking about things, having opinions on things, and, you know, controlling how you observe your surroundings.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think you're on the right track there. Anyone else want to take a stab at what the consciousness is?
Maybe it has to do with like the brain's awareness. The
brain's awareness of itself in some way, right?
Like of itself and its surroundings and yeah, stuff like that. Mm-hmm.
So being able to experience the world in some ways through our sensory input, that's certainly one level of consciousness, isn't it? Anybody else want to take a stab at it? Okay, well, tonight we're going to look at consciousness, think about how it affects us. So the medical definition of consciousness is, doctor, he's just recovered from surgery. Is he conscious? And there's actually different medical instruments that can be used. One is called the Glasgow Coma Scale, where you actually can rate someone's level of awareness or level of consciousness. So if you and I are carrying on a conversation and you are responding to questions from me, and I'm basically saying, can you tell me your name? Can you tell me what today's date might be? Can you tell me the year? Who is the president of the United States? You know, those are all questions to not only rate consciousness, but maybe even rate your mental status on some level. But if you're having a responsive conversation with me, would you say that person is conscious?
Yes.
Yeah, probably would be. Probably. Although, how many of you have ever had the experience of being in the room when someone is sleeping and you hear them talking in their sleep, you talk back to them, and they respond back to you? Are they conscious?
No.
Nope.
Why not? Because on our first definition, or the medical definition, they responded to us when we answered questions. In that context, they also responded to us. What's the difference?
They don't have an awareness of like what you said.
But they responded to you.
They probably didn't purposely intend to respond.
Maybe they didn't intend to it. So is there an element of free will in there? I mean, these are all really good questions. It just scratching the surface, it shows us on a big level what the nature of consciousness is and how difficult it is to even define or getting kind of our mind around it. But the medical definition is the awareness demonstrated by any ability to recall an experience. So memory might be involved in that. The psychological definition is awareness of the outside world and awareness of one's mental processes, thoughts, feelings, and perceptions. Now, this is a big one because in some ways, the current, prevailing cognitive definition of what consciousness is called the hot theory, or the higher order thinking theory. Human beings are one of the few creatures on the planet that we know of that has the ability to demonstrate that we can observe our own thoughts. We can observe our own behavior. My wife does this thing sometimes where she will drop something. She'll be carrying a book or something into one room to another in the house, and then she will drop it. And then she'll say, "Oh, Cindy, watch yourself." And I always say, "Who are you talking to?" Who is that? Who's talking right now? Because she's speaking about herself in the third person in some ways. And, who is that? What's that about? From a psychodynamic point of view, we might say that is the observing ego. That's a portion of ourself, or a portion of our mind or our personality that has that ability to step back and observe kind of what we're doing. If you've ever had a moment of self-consciousness, has anyone ever been in a play or had to sing on stage or perform on stage in some way? Have you ever had that experience? And if you did, tell us about it.
Yeah, I used to be in an orchestra, so we performed.
What did you play?
I played violin.
Violin. So you played violin, and did you ever have a solo part, or were you always part of the orchestra?
Yeah, I had solos in certain pieces.
What was the solo experience different from playing with the orchestra altogether?
Yeah, there's a lot more pressure.
So when you say pressure, what does that mean?
Like nerves, because there's not like people to cover you up in case you make a mistake.
So you're kind of out there on your own. You're playing on your own, and everyone's listening to you. And so your
Right.
level of nervousness, your level of awareness, really, your anxiety is going up, isn't it?
Correct.
And really, and in fact, one definition of anxiety is an over-aroused brain. And so anxiety really is super consciousness. You're super conscious. You're very conscious of your surroundings to the point where you're able to pick out every little detail. An extreme example of that is something that psychologists call hypervigilance. You see that happening when people who have been traumatized in some way. But performing on stage is not necessarily a traumatizing event, we hope, but it is an arousing event in that we're more conscious of ourselves and our performance. So the scope of consciousness: can unconscious thoughts affect your behavior? What do you think? Now, first of all, let's think about what is unconscious thought. So we defined conscious a little bit, consciousness. What is it? What does unconscious mean? What is that about? Anyone want to take a stab at that?
Unconsciousness is unconscious. Hold on. Can I be heard? Am I being heard?
Yeah, speak up a little bit.
Unconsciousness is when you physically don't have control over your body, but your brain is still processing information.
Okay. That might be a part of it. Good. Anybody else want to take a stab at unconscious?
I'd say it also includes aspects of things that you might be thinking, reactions that you might have, fight or flight, that kind of stuff that you aren't necessarily aware that you're even having these thoughts.
Yes. Yeah, very good. Yeah, unconscious is unconscious because it's really unconscious, meaning that you're not aware of it at all. It's all the thoughts, memories, experiences, emotions that are not in your current present awareness, that is unconscious. You know, you have layers of that, layers of consciousness. One of the layers of consciousness is known as like the pre-conscious part, or kind of first level unconscious. That's things like you're not constantly in your awareness, but you can recall instantly. Tell me your date of birth. What's your social security number? What's your mother's maiden name? You know, what elementary school did you go to? You know, all of those are questions that are autobiographical questions that you probably know exactly perfect, but it's not in your constant present awareness. So conscious, we'll get to the Necker cube in a minute. Non-consciousness is you can learn to alter through biofeedback training. That's your physiological responses. What we've learned is that your brain, if you're getting feedback about processes in your body that you're not normally getting feedback about, you are able to actually have a conscious control over those components. So things like your respiration rate, your heart rate, the level of your galvanic skin response, the temperature of your fingers and your hands, actually, you can learn to control within a few degrees. People have been shown to be able to do that. Even your brainwave patterns, once you get feedback from what's happening on your brainwave patterns, you are actually able to gain some control of it. And biofeedback can be used to teach people all kinds of amazing abilities, but mostly it's used to help people who are either suffering from extreme anxiety or extreme depression, to modulate the awareness or the arousal level of their brain and bring it into a baseline or an arousal level that you have a calm, active mind and a calm, relaxed body. That's kind of where we all want to be. Hopefully you're there right now at this moment. Unconscious and a subconscious view. Freud and Jung and a lot of the psychodynamic theorists back in the turn of the 20th century used the idea of unconscious and subconscious as a way to look at the deeper, darker parts of our impulses that were, or even repressed memories from childhood or from traumatic events that are repressed and were not immediately available for our consciousness, and that they exacted some level of toll on us and might even control a little bit of our behavior on some level, depending on how unconscious it really is. The current usage of the term, because the prevailing paradigm in psychology has shifted to cognitive behavioral and even neuroscience, even more so, it's more likely to be described in terms of brain function rather than the older psychological theories, even though I still hold a lot of credence for both. And they both have a lot of equal interesting components to it, or interesting truths to it. You've probably seen this cube before. You probably learned how to draw it when you were a child or when you were in art class. It's called the Necker cube. And it's a good example of how our brain can trick us into an optical illusion and figuring out which one is the front surface, which one is the rear surface of the cube. It almost seems like a magic trick, depending on which square we're focusing on the cube. It has a three-dimensional kind of look look to it. So can we really process information without awareness? Now, Freud, I would say absolutely. How many of you have ever not known the answer to a problem or a solution, to a problem, or even the answer to a question, or the answer to a decision that you were going to make in life. You went to sleep and you either had a dream about it, or you woke up the next morning with a lot more clarity, and you said, okay, I feel pretty clear about it now. Now I'm going to make this decision. Has anyone ever had a dream about a decision they had to make, or felt more clarity when they woke up? Anybody want to give us an example?
I think when you're resting and you're giving yourself time to your unconscious mind to ruminate on the problem. For example, what you might want to say during a speech. I've always been stressed about that, but then less stressed once I get up in the morning.
Okay. So, there is one theory that your mind is actually doing processing overnight. There's been a lot of studies to show that you can actually assimilate information that is playing over headphones or speakers at night while you're asleep. A lot of other studies have suggested that you have the ability to read something or learn something right before you go to sleep. You then sleep on it, and people seem to have a greater recall than if they read it in the morning and then they have their normal daily activity and then they try to recall it the next day. It's kind of interesting. So something definitely is going on. Some research that has been done with word pairings with unconscious surgery patients. They have found that even people who are in anesthesia, some part of their unconscious awareness is aware, seems to encode the information, and can give it back later on. So it's kind of fascinating. Blindsight and priming. Anybody know what priming basically is? Giving a person a set of information and then getting them to give you back information that's related. A lot of times you'll have people who will do jokes to you about that kind of thing. Seem to recall a kid joke about cows and milk. If cows drink milk, does anyone know that joke? Something to that effect. I'll have to ask my son to tell me that one again. But that's a good example. Jokes sometimes are a good example of priming because you're setting someone up for a particular pairing. Blindsight is the ability to infer information from incomplete data. So here's a stimulus used in a priming experience. So which of these figures do you think can actually exist, and which of them are optical illusions that probably can't exist in reality? Anybody want to take a stab at that? 10 looks like it probably can exist.
Maybe 7 can exist?
7 looks like it might exist, yep.
And 12.
And 12, yep. Does 6 looks more like, what do you think? That looks like an optical illusion, doesn't it?
11 could potentially exist.
11 potentially?
No, because the left side thingy,
It's too odd there.
nothing.
Not necessarily, because of the way it jets out. It could be going in a different direction than what you could just visualize.
Could be an interior, might be an interior part that looks up like an illusion from this angle. What about 8?
I feel like 8 is an optical illusion. I don't know, the top just seems, it might just be the angle of it, but it just seems like it just doesn't work. I don't know.
If you visualize it as an upside down box, it kind of works.
Yeah,
Turn your head upside down.
Mm-hmm. So you guys are very creative in how you're visualizing things. That's good. So here's the ones who can actually exist. So y'all are on the right track for those. And then all the others don't seem to be able to exist in reality, at least not how they're presented here.
Theoretically, though, you could just like print out this outer like skeleton structure of it for any of them.
Yeah, I mean, you can certainly set up this illusion in 3 dimensions in the real world from a certain angle, and it would look like something that couldn't exist if you set it up from that angle. All right, so subliminal messages can change your behavior. This is really interesting. You know, we think about a lot of advertising being subliminal. You may have read about how advertisers may sometimes use subliminal messages, try to activate our base instincts, our instincts for hunger or thirst, for sex, you know, any of those to try to stimulate us to the point where we have an association with a pleasant feeling or experience in that particular product. And they are hoping that at some point when we see the product again, that we'll have a similar low-level experience, and then we'll be more likely to buy that product. Subliminal stimuli can influence your behavior is the theory. Subliminal stimuli provide an effective means of changing people's behavior, attitudes, or both. That's the theory behind it, but is that really true? Do you know what subliminal means? Subliminal. What does that mean?
It's like they're advertising not to your conscious mind, but to your unconscious mind for future actions.
Right, like they may have a picture, and inside the picture is embedded a message that you don't automatically read. You just kind of scan over the picture, and then your unconscious mind is supposed to maybe pick up the message. Sometimes you think about this in music. Back in the 70s and 80s, when I grew up, there was a big worry with this technique called backward masking that allegedly rock and roll artists were putting into music. And when you played the record backwards, so you kind of put the turntable in neutral, and then you played it backwards, you could hear a different message than what you heard when it was going forward. And allegedly that was influencing our minds and making us worship the devil or doing all sorts of nefarious, terrible things. And my parents were very concerned about all of this back in the day, but so far the nefariousness of whatever subliminal messages that were put in rock and roll didn't seem to have affected me that I'm aware of, you know. But of course, if it really doesn't work, then are you even aware of it? So many claims for subliminal advertising are actually hoaxes, and testimonials may be biased in some ways. You know, if you present someone with a stimulus, you tell them that it's a powerful image and it has a hypnotic suggestion and it's going to affect you, then, you know, someone who is susceptible to suggestion may behave in a different way simply because you've suggested that the stimulus is going to affect their behavior. But controlled experiments that assess the effectiveness have discovered that it's not a whole lot, doesn't really do a whole lot for a person. So subliminal perception occurs but has no potential for mind control. In other words, subliminal effects are usually small and short-lived. Subliminal messages mainly affect simple judgments, overall arousal, or temporary conditions. But of course, you know, if you're in a movie theater or you're in a concert or you're at a sporting event and all they want you to do is buy more popcorn or consume more beverages, then just a little bit of the subliminal message might be all they need to do to push you over the edge. But of course,
can't a subliminal message just be like a picture of like, say like a food or something like a company's advertising?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, if you actually do some study into what advertisers actually do to present food, you know, a good example is when you go to a fast food restaurant. Does the hamburger you get ever look like the picture on the commercial? Does that ever happen to you?
Of course not.
No, it never looks
It looks like trash.
Unless it's a podcast.
Yeah, it almost always looks, certainly doesn't look like anything that we want, right? So so it really shows you that, you know, even just something that's not subliminal, they're just dressing up the food to make it look as appetizing as it possibly can look, draws us in, but it never looks like that.
Well, by the time you have the burger, I think like you just want to eat the food, right? It's not like they can give you the food to eat during the commercials. So you're like, dang, that looks tasty. But when you actually get it, you're like, I want to taste this.
Right. Exactly.
Well, it's more you see the picture, and then when you feel hungry, your mind snaps back to the picture.
Yeah, that both are equally true. And we, you know, and we're not going to a restaurant when we're not hungry to begin with. We're going to a restaurant to feed ourselves, even if it's fast food. And so we're showing up and we're hungry. You know, one of my favorite fast food restaurants is Tijuana Flats. And that's a local Central Florida restaurant. And if you've ever gone to Tijuana Flats, you know, their motto is keeping it fresh. So they're supposed to have kind of fresh everything. And I usually get their blackened chicken taco, soft on a whole wheat tortilla, power light with everything on it. And I've gone there during a regular day, and it's pretty good. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that food. But then I've gone on days when I have biked about 25 miles in the morning. I've gotten up really early, and I've biked on the Orlando Orange Blossom Trail, or the Orange County Trail bike trail. And if you've ever biked or ever really exerted yourself, then you eat something, suddenly that is like the best taco you've ever eaten in your whole life. So, you know, your own physiological state, of course, affects the messages from advertisers. It affects your experience with food and with products, and it might affect your overall experience for most things, depending on what your physiological state might be. So the next slide here kind of talks a little bit about what I was saying earlier. Can the messages be perceived if they're in the rock and roll music? So participants could not understand the backwards messages at a conscious level. The meaning of the backwards messages were not subconsciously understood either. There's no evidence of that. And the backward message did not alter the participants' behaviors. So I wish I kind of had access to this study back in the 80s. Then I wouldn't have gotten into an argument with the Sunday school teacher and gotten thrown out of Sunday school about this, among other things. But so, you know, we always have to be critical thinkers when it comes to any kind of claims that are being made. So altered states of consciousness. Have any of you ever experienced an altered state of consciousness? Does anyone want to share their altered state of consciousness experience?
Does coming off of anesthesia count?
Yes, that's absolutely. Tell us about your experience coming off anesthesia, Micaiah.
It's kind of like you're half awake, but you're half not. So you're saying stuff, but you're not going to remember it. And like when the anesthesia wears off, and they'll like my parents would tell me like what I was saying, and I would be like, I don't even remember saying that or doing that.
Fantastic experience. Yeah, very, very good example.
What about sleep paralysis?
Sleep paralysis, yeah. What is your experience with sleep paralysis?
Uh, I would be awake, but I wouldn't be awake at the same time. Like I'd be aware of the room, but like my body wouldn't be able to move. And sometimes I would see something that's not there, but it's like when I wake up, it's just clearly not there. But when you're in that state, you really feel like it's there. So it's confusing.
I'd also like to explain my experience about sleep paralysis. Just to add, I experienced it like my senior year. It was like, it wasn't really anxiety related. I thought it might have been potentially that, but I think it was more about my sleep schedule. So when I get home from school, I'd immediately take a nap to like 4 or 5, and then I'd sleep late at night around 1 and wake up at 5. And I had an instance where like it got really messed up, that schedule, and I had like a sleep paralysis. It was like a really crazy sensation. I mean, as crazy as it sounds, it's almost like you want to experience it again just because of how crazy it was. Like it felt like you were dying. I mean, I don't want to go that deep. Like it felt like you were dying, but you're not really. And like it just like it was an interesting sensation. And like just to add on what he was saying, just a cool. It was not cool, but like it was kind of like a really scary experience, I'd say.
Yeah,
Like
it's really weird.
Yeah, sometimes it can be like the scary experience, like maybe like if you're skydiving or something. It can also be like thrilling in a way. So, I mean, I don't want to experience it again, obviously, for health reasons and with that. But it just like, I didn't even know it existed. And I had to look it up what it was. I didn't know what it was. It's just the craziest thing. And it's simply caused by my sleep schedule. That's crazy.
Yeah, I had a similar issue with my sleep schedule being like that. I took a nap in my friend's dorm, and I like woke up, and I swear I heard a full-on conversation, and no one was there. Like I saw no one was there, so I thought I thought it was crazy, but I knew it wasn't because it was like I heard that's like some things that happen, but I heard an entire conversation, and I knew no one was there. So I wonder how my mind came up with that conversation.
Yeah, that might have been what's known as a hypnagogic hallucination. It 100% of all of us at some point in our life will have what's known as a hypnagogic hallucination, and that's a perceptual experience as we're coming out of sleep or going into sleep that seems like it's occurring in the real world, but it's not. It's occurring within our own brain activity or in our mind. But yeah, all of those examples are great examples of altered states of consciousness, and certainly different levels of sleep is the one altered state of consciousness that we all experience on hopefully on a daily basis. I hope you're getting plenty of good sleep. Some of the things that we do on an everyday way in order to alter our state of consciousness is, if you exercise, you go from a state of low arousal to a state of high arousal. When you exercise, your heart is pumping, you're getting more blood, and your brain is getting oxygenated. Your arousal level is going up, and that actually helps with your altered to bring you to a more benign, more beneficial state of consciousness. Another way to alter our consciousness that we do often is coffee. Coffee or tea, any kind of caffeinated beverage. Caffeine is a mind-altering drug. It's a stimulant, and it alters your state of consciousness. It brings your arousal threshold up. Alcohol, if you like red wine, or you drink beer, or you do rum, or whatever your preferred ethyl alcohol is, that's also altering your state of consciousness. But that's bringing your awareness and your arousal level down, because it's a depressant, as you all I hope know at this point. But the slide says altered states of consciousness, its mental processing shows distinct changes unique to that state. Waking consciousness is viewed as the most common or baseline state, or at least the one we're most conscious of. But considerable cultural variations in what is considered normal consciousness occurs as well. And this also is certainly influenced by maybe even your belief system. The Buddhist, for example, one of the things that you are seeking out as a Buddhist is you are seeking enlightenment. You are seeking a state of being asleep. Even in your conscious self, you're not very aware of the world, to a state of being awake. And you suddenly have that aha moment. Aha, wow, I see now my place in the universe. You know, it's so much bigger than I thought. One of my favorite ways to alter my state of consciousness is to have what's known as a relativization of the ego state. If you've ever been mountain climbing, or you've ever been out on the ocean, or you've ever been way out in the country where you could see all the stars, and you laid out and you looked up, and you suddenly had this moment where you realized, I am so small and the universe is so big and vast. And in some ways it's diminishing and intimidating, and in other ways it's comforting, paradoxically, because you can kind of see your place in a much larger picture. That's a kind of altered state of consciousness. Almost all spiritual experiences on some level are altered states of consciousness. You know, even meditation can be an altered state of consciousness, trying to get to a preferred state of consciousness. So sleeping and dreaming is something that happens to us. Even people who say they don't dream actually do dream. If you want to dream and remember your dreams, the first thing you have to do is intend to remember them. And one helpful way to do that is get yourself a dream journal. It can be any kind of notebook, anything from beautiful leather, embossed, gorgeous, ancient looking dream journal to just a regular old notebook, that spiral bound that you pick up at the at Walmart or wherever, and put that by your bed with a pen and say, I'm going to start writing my dreams down. And you'll be surprised, and as you go to sleep and when you wake up, as you begin to write every single day, how many of your dreams that you will remember, and then you can begin doing dream work. I did a lot of study at the Jung Institute, the Carl Jung Institute, who was a disciple of Freud, and then he spun off into his own branch of psychoanalysis. But I studied at the Jung Institute in Kuznach, Switzerland, which was just out of Zurich, a couple of different times over the course of my career, once in 2001, and then again about 11 years later. But it's a wonderful place, and I learned how to do a Jungian dream analysis and interpretation. And that's really fascinating, and I'm a big believer in your unconscious mind processing through dreams and telling you some important information that might be helpful to you solving problems or growing or those sorts of things. So if you are interested in going on a psychological growth journey, then starting to record your dreams is a good way to begin. But physiologically, you have different states of sleep. You have non-REM. REM stands for rapid eye movement. And then you have REM sleep. And here's what it looks like on an EEG machine. So they put electrodes on your skull, across the top of your head and all around your head, and they record your brainwave activity. So here's what it looks like when you're awake. This is drowsy and relaxed. So maybe, you know, a deeper kind of meditative sort of state. And then we have stage N1 sleep. N2, they used to call this theta alpha or alpha theta delta waves. Stage 3 sleep, and then REM sleep. REM sleep is the stage of sleep where dreaming is mostly occurring. And the reason why people have sleep paralysis, as two of you had talked a little bit about earlier, is because during REM sleep, your motor abilities to control your body are actually shut off. And one of the reasons they think that might happen is so that you're not acting out your dreams when you're dreaming, because your brain really doesn't know the difference between your awake, your imaginal life, what you're imagining and what you're telling yourself, and what you're dreaming. All of that are equally valid realities as far as your subjective world goes. That's why it's important what you tell yourself and what you imagine about yourself too, because that can become just as much of a reality for you as anything else. But sometimes that switch, that physiological switch or brain switch that turns off your body ability doesn't switch back on, and you can have an awake, conscious mind, but a body that's not responding, and so then you get sleep paralysis. Typically, it doesn't last very long, but some people claim to have experienced it for even up to several minutes. So here's what the typical sleep cycle looks like. We typically sleep in cycles of deeper sleep and wakefulness. And usually these cycles are around 90 minutes in length or so. That's the average sleep cycle. And you're trying to get to sleep, trying to go to sleep, and it goes on and on and on to these different levels. So sleep disorders, insomnia, that's the inability to go to sleep or the inability to stay asleep. Certainly something I suffer from. I sometimes get students who are astonished that I'm awake. When I'm awake, I have had students in the past text me at 3 o'clock in the morning, and then I'm awake surfing my telephone, and I text them back, and I'm like, wow, that's service. So that can be a benefit, I guess, for if you're an insomniac. Narcolepsy is a disorder where a person suddenly and often without warning will fall asleep, go from a conscious to an unconscious sleep state. It can be very dangerous, obviously, if you're driving or operating any kind of motor vehicle or such. Sleep apnea is a disorder where a person suddenly stops breathing, and the amount of oxygen getting to their brain plunges, and then they catch back up and begin breathing again. Sometimes that's a structural issue with a person's vocal cord or their larynx and their throat, their soft palate, how that is all built can cause sleep apnea sometimes. Sometimes it's a person's weight. People who are heavier, are morbidly obese, tend to suffer from sleep apnea more often than those who do not. Sometimes it's sleep position, how a person is sleeping, and sleeping with a pillow under your neck or no pillow at all. This depends on the person, can affect your sleep. Often people with sleep apnea, in order to diagnose this, they have to do a sleep study where you actually go into a doctor's office, you sleep in a lab, they hook you up to wires and such, and then they watch you sleep and monitor you through the night. A lot of those kinds of sleep studies, though, are now being done at home, where they actually give you a much smaller machine and you hook yourself up to it, and it just monitors your sleep. There's even apps that you can download on your smartphone, and put your smartphone under your pillow or on your bed, and it will monitor your sleep quality. That's kind of fascinating. I teach the Sleep and Dreams course here at UCF, and I often encourage students to download that app so they can read more about it. Sudden infant death syndrome, one theory is that it may be actually a form of sleep apnea, or it may be a position that the infant is in and suddenly is unable to get oxygen and dies in their sleep because of some either structural issue, or it could just be something as simply as a blanket is bunched up too close to the baby's mouth, and if they're really young, they're not able to push it away or roll over yet, and so they die of either carbon dioxide poisoning or some kind of lack of oxygen. Sleepwalking. Anybody here ever sleepwalk? Anyone want to talk about their sleepwalking experience?
I did once. It was so weird. I didn't remember anything. I just woke up in a different part of the house.
Oh, wow. That must have been a little scary.
Yeah.
I used to have problems with sleepwalking, even sleep talking, like to the point where I would have full on, like, really strange conversations with people.
Interesting.
Wow, that's crazy.
To try and leave our hotel rooms every time we stayed somewhere that wasn't home and sleep.
Oh, wow. Yeah, all good examples of sleepwalking. Yeah. So sleepwalking is almost kind of the opposite experience of sleep paralysis, where a person actually has the ability to move around, but is actually asleep. One medication we know that has been known to actually affect this is, ironically, the sleep medication. Lunesta is one of them, and Ambien is another one of them. I had a client who was prescribed Ambien for chronic insomnia, and they woke up in their pajamas in Walgreens. So not only had they slept they slept drove all the way to Walgreens, and then woke up in the aisle of Walgreens and had no idea how they got there. So that's a little bit scary. Nightmares can be difficult. You see this sometimes in young children. You might see this in people who have been traumatized. Will have nightmares. Sleep terror disorder or night terrors is basically panic attacks while you're asleep. Not a fun experience. Now think about if you couple sleep terror disorder with sleep paralysis. That can be really debilitating. And there's one theory that the whole experience that people claim to have regarding alien abduction or visitations from ghosts and such might simply be sleep terror disorder coupled with sleep paralysis, and then hypnagogic hallucinations that have kind of created that experience. REM behavior disorder is just a person who's acting out their dreams or acting out their in their sleep in some ways. So sleep is definitely in a cycle. You have something called the circadian rhythms in your body, and cycles of behavior and physiology that repeat every 24 hours. And disruptions of the sleep-wake cycle can cause problems. It causes more problems if you are flying east. If you're flying east, you are losing time, and you arrive at a different time, and your biological clock is all wonky. What I typically try to do if I fly to Europe, back when that was possible, or I fly east, then I will stay awake on local time, do my very best to do that. I might take a quick nap if that is absolutely necessary, but I try to stay awake until the regular time that I would have gone to sleep anyway. As night is falling, I take a melatonin, which is an over-the-counter sleep remedy, and melatonin is a naturally occurring hormone that your brain actually makes that tells your brain that it's time to go to sleep. And melatonin is produced at lower light levels. So the lower the light level, the darker it gets, the more melatonin your brain begins to produce. The more light there is, the less melatonin your brain produces. That's actually one theory about why we have insomnia in the modern age more than we may have had in the past, because of all the artificial light we now can create with electricity, or the blue or ultraviolet light that comes off of our electronics that may affect our sleep cycle. So if you have a sleep issue, then you definitely want to use your bedroom only for sleeping or for intimate activities with your loved one, and that's it. And then, you want to do your studying and your entertainment and everything else outside of the bedroom. That way you're training your body that when you go to bed, it's time to go to sleep. So individual variations in timing of a circadian sleep rhythms can vary. You have those morning people, like my wife is, good morning. She's up and spry at 5:30 every single morning, and I'm desperately trying to keep sleeping, and she wants me to get up to go walking with her, which is definitely what I need to do. But she has made me more of a morning person than I ever used to be. I definitely was much more of a night owl before I married her. We also have an internal biological clock. You may have noticed that at times you may get up just a few minutes before your alarm clock goes off. I think we talked about this in a previous class. That is a good example of your internal biological clock. So here's a diagram. You have the suprachiasmatic nuclei here that definitely affects sleep. You have the locus coeruleus here in your brainstem, your pineal gland. That's the part that helps to secrete different hormones that are involved in sleeping. Your cerebellum is a big part of your arousal level, and your hindbrain as well. But sleep is mostly occurring in your lower brain regions. Sleep deprivation is a good way to brainwash people or torture people. The CIA, of course, FBI, police know this. They love trying to keep suspects awake. You know, they'll handcuff you to a chair and interrogate you, because the less sleep you have, the more suggestible you are, the less you're able to fight back, and the more you're more likely to just tell them anything to get over the sleep, to be able to get back to sleep. So it's very important to get your good sleep. I have, as I've said before, I'm a forensic psychologist, and I've actually testified in a couple of different trials, and these were murder trials of all things, that the main defense for the defendant was sleep deprivation, which caused a psychotic episode that led to them killing the person that they killed. And one man had stayed awake more than 72 hours, and he had gone into a homicidal rage. His wife was trying to keep him awake, and she threw a vacuum cleaner at him. He unwrapped the vacuum cleaner cord. He wrapped it around her neck and choked her to death and killed her. And he called the police after it had happened, very remorseful. But when he was in custody, almost immediately they put the video camera on him, and he went right to sleep and slept through about 4 hours of continuous video when they were trying to talk to him. And I used the video as a big part of the evidence that he was in fact sleep deprived. And there's so much evidence, volumes and volumes and volumes of studies that have been done over the years that show and demonstrate sleep deprivation can be highly dangerous and create temporary psychotic states. So the slide here says what happens for sleep deprivation individuals. They don't make up every hour lost, sleep 50% more than usual sometimes. There's a recovery night that includes unusually percentage of REM sleep. So, you know, if you stayed up all night, you went to that concert, you partied all night, and now you're 48 hours without a whole lot of sleep, you know, you might get that 16 hours of sleep in the next night. So special functions of REM sleep, it may improve functioning of neurons that use norepinephrine. We know that norepinephrine is vital in mood regulation. There's a couple of different antidepressants that affect norepinephrine. One is Wellbutrin, the other is Effexor, and I think there's even some newer antidepressants on the market now that affect that particular neurotransmitter. It may be time for creating or strengthening neural connections. So One theory about sleep is that it's a way that it's a time that your body uses to sweep away all the impurities in your brain and to increase the dendrite connections. May help to solidify and absorb the day's experiences and skills. It may improve daytime creativity. It may even aid in memory of information. So again, sleep is really important. And in fact, it's so important that one of the main things I ask anyone who comes in complaining of either anxiety or depression, if they're coming into my office for psychotherapy or treatment, is I always ask, how is your sleep? And if the sleep is really poor, that might be one of the very first things I try to help them fix. Excuse me. And part of that is helping them fix it is to increase their sleep hygiene. And that's doing a little bit of what I had said earlier, only using the bedroom for sleep, making sure that you're going to bed at the same time every day, getting up at about the same time every day, and not using electronics in the bed, learning to meditate, exercising early in the morning, because exercise is arousing. If you exercise even a couple of hours before you go to bed, sometimes that will keep you awake depending on the level of exercise. So just a few of things like that can be really helpful, getting someone to help them get to sleep. So benefits of sleep. Sleep deprivation can lead to fatigue, irritability, memory problems, and even inattention. And the person can be dangerous to themselves and others, as my murder story suggested. Sleep can be very restorative, helps to restore the body and brain for future activities, it helps to consolidate memories of newly learned facts. So in dreaming, there's some brain activity during sleep that is experienced as dreams. Most of that occurs in REM, may last only a few seconds or for many minutes. Despite the senselessness seemingly of dreams, it often contains some logic. And then a lot of times what happens is that our conscious mind will stitch together our dreams into a coherent narrative. Many times the narrative you get from someone's dream that they tell you, or even the dream that you yourself are writing down in your dream journal for yourself, is your conscious mind's way of stitching together the different little dream snippets that you might be having into some kind of narrative that can be more easily understood. But even that is good for interpretation and working with that dream. So daytime activities may influence the content of the dreams. Lucid dreaming involves intentionally directing the dream content. Has anyone ever had a lucid dream? Have you ever had a dream where you suddenly were aware that you were dreaming? Anybody want to share?
Yeah, it's pretty sick.
Sick meaning that means good.
Yes, sick means good. I only did the boring things though, and just flew. It's like, oh wow, I can fly. And then I probably woke up. It was a while back.
Fun. Wow, that's neat.
I remember I had one that I was like, when I was like 10 years old, I was in some like sort of desert and there was like a huge cage and there was a dinosaur. So I had to like fight this dinosaur. And then after I finished fighting it, I like imagined the rocket ship and I went on the rocket ship and I flew off and started eating Oreos and I swore I could taste the Oreos in the dream. It was so funny. It was really cool.
Wow, that's neat. Now, I almost had a little sensation of tasting them now. That's when you mentioned that. That's awesome.
In the past, I've known it was a dream, like during the dream, but I've never actively affected the dreams.
But you were aware that you were dreaming at the moment you were dreaming.
Yes.
Awesome. Another great example.
When I was younger, I used to have like the same kind of nightmares, and I got to the point where I was able to recognize it was the same dream, and then I forget what I did, but I figured out a way to get myself out of the dream and force myself to wake up.
Wow, that's neat too. Yeah, having that moment of lucid dreaming and knowing that you're dreaming when you're dreaming is nice. I've had some dreams that when I awoke from them, I was like, oh, thank God that's not reality. It was so horrible. And then other dreams where I'm like, oh, I want to go back. It was so beautiful. So depending on what kind of dream it is, whether you want to live in that reality or not. So why do we dream? Dreaming may be a process for analyzing and consolidating important information. Freud thought that dreams are a disguised form of wish fulfillment. Jung really saw dreams as the unconscious and even the collective unconscious way of helping you to solve problems and to grow into a part of consciousness or a state of consciousness that Jung called individuation, becoming your full, complete, whole self. And the Buddhists would call it enlightenment. Christians may call it getting saved. It just depends on what your belief system is. But I like Jung's theory of it or understanding of it, because I think we all are growing and moving toward a state of individuation or a state of greater wholeness. As we accumulate more information, we understand different things, and we're able to grow in our life. So your dreams can be an important part of that growth process. Another theory is the activation synthesis theory. So even if dreams arise from random brain activity, content may have psychological significance. All right, so hypnosis. So what do you think? Can you be hypnotized to do things against your will? What do you think? Do you think you can, or is that not possible? Anybody have any experience with hypnosis they want to share?
No, I don't think that's crazy. I don't think that's real.
I don't have experiences, but I have like theories that potentially, not completely against your will, you can't be hypnotized to do something that you would be full on like against, but you can be subconsciously directed into doing something.
Okay.
I believe that when people do those like hypnosis things, I don't know, maybe the only way it might be possible is if the person who went up there is willing to be hypnotized, so they have like mental consent or something.
So you're talking about a stage hypnotist, kind of, you're there for an entertainment situation. Yeah. Well, a lot of times people who go to those stage hypnotist kind of shows already have some inkling about what might happen. One trick a lot of the stage hypnotists use is they will come out on stage and, there's a lot of excitement at first, and they will begin telling a story, and it will be kind of a boring story. And they will make suggestions in the story about you're itching, at the top of your head, or you're yawning, and they will pick out people in the audience who react to the suggestion. So, if they have a suggestion where your top of your head might be itching and there's someone out there who's scratching their head, the stage hypnotist knows that person is more likely to be susceptible to suggestion and maybe even more cooperative with his suggestions on stage. And so they would typically pick that person out in the audience from random and bring them up. And then they will put them under an hypnotic state and tell them to do things. And the person is there to be entertained. And so they typically are pretty cooperative with that. And the ones who aren't cooperative, the stage hypnotist will immediately weed out and tell them to go back, sit down, and, thank you very much. Give them a big hand, everybody. What a great, now let's do something with this person, And so it will look like a part of the show, but they weed out the ones who aren't going to be as cooperative. But hypnosis, as it's used as a therapeutic technique, if you define hypnosis as an altered state of consciousness brought on by use of special techniques, the truth is that all psychotherapy then, on some level, is hypnosis, because you are making a suggestion that you hope the person will incorporate into their life in a positive way that's going to improve their life and help to promote their growth on some level. And so from that perspective, then all psychotherapy or all counseling is hypnosis. Have you ever had an experience where someone close to you, a good friend, a parent, or even a girlfriend or a boyfriend, said something to you and it just sunk in, and you began to hear what they had said in your mind over and over again throughout the day, and that it just sticks with you? Gosh, what they said made a lot of sense, and it just goes on and on and on. Has anyone ever had that experience before that you can think of? You
I mean, the first time sorry.
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Okay, that happened to me the first time my ex-boyfriend said I love you for the first time.
Nice.
Kind of a positive take on it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, good example. And so that I love you really resonated, and you heard it over and over and over again. Yeah, and that's kind of a form of hypnosis in some ways. There's a suggestion that happens, you take it in, it kind of takes a life of its own on, and it goes on and on and on. So when you're in the hypnotic state, that produces a responsiveness to suggestions for changes in one's experience or behavior. And the hypnotically susceptible people tend to be different from others. They have a better ability to focus and ignore distractions and have more active imaginations. They tend to fantasize, and they produce information quickly and have positive attitudes about hypnosis. People who have the ability to disassociate are good subjects for hypnosis typically, as long as they're not disassociating to a level that might be destructive. There are dissociative disorders, but people who have those active imaginations are able to be go under hypnosis. You can even hypnotize yourself. You can go on YouTube and you can Google positive visualization hypnosis, or positive guided imagery, something like that. Positive guided imagery, mindfulness, any of those keywords will come up with hundreds and hundreds of videos where someone will take you through a very relaxed kind of experience where you begin to feel yourself drifting down and down, and even just, my voice in some way, or having someone's voice say that to you can be really powerful, and begin to create a hypnotic state. But mindfulness is a kind of a form of hypnosis, and that's kind of all the rage now. People are teaching their clients hypnosis. So the results of hypnosis, there has been some suggestion of behavioral changes. People often will go for hypnosis to change eating patterns, for example. There's one form of hypnosis that is called neuro-linguistic programming, where you actually get anchored in your body a certain word or phrase that then comes up and gets associated through classical conditioning with some kind of response that you're hoping to have. So, so one good example is, say a person is obsessed with pizza and they're really gaining a lot of weight because they're eating too much pizza, then you might, as the therapist or as the hypnotist, first of all, you want to understand what is the person's associations with pizza, and how do they visualize it right now at this moment. And they may give you all these positive, delicious, wonderful, glaring kind of descriptions, you know. Oh, the pizza is piping hot. It just come out of the oven. It, you know, the crust is just so crispy, and the cheese has just melted just right. It's got all my favorite toppings on it. You know, I pull up the pizza and I look at it. Oh, I can smell it. It smells so good. And so they have all these very positive, self-reinforcing kind of associations with it. So your job might be to help them have different associations with the pizza by having them visualize it in a different context. So for example, you might say you're walking along a street and you go down an alley and there's a huge garbage dump down there and there's several garbage cans. One of them is closed. I want you to go over and open the garbage can up, and inside of it is 3-week-old pizza in a box. And it's disgusting and it's gross, blah, blah, blah. You know, I'm not going to gross you out with the whole description, but you can kind of see what you're trying to do with giving the person different associations with the desired imagery to something less desired. Other behavioral changes that might happen are like quitting smoking, for example, or quitting other addictive behavior have all shown positive results with hypnosis. People have been able to be age regressed with hypnosis. So, you know, there's one theory that even though you're growing, you know, I'm 50 years old, but my 40-year-old self, my 30-year-old self, even my 10-year-old self are still with me. They're all still here with me. And I can access those different parts of myself or level of myself by going through maybe an age regression in hypnosis. Post-hypnotic suggestions are things like, so what I'm going to do is every single time you hear the word jackpot, whenever you hear the word jackpot, you are going to have a very positive, happy association with that term in regards to your bank account. And every time that you go to save money, the more money you save, you're going to say to yourself, jackpot, whenever you save that money. When you hear that word jackpot, you're going to feel very, very positive. So, you know, you're anchoring a post-hypnotic suggestion and trying to anchor it to some kind of behavior in some way. Post-hypnotic amnesia is when a person is told to forget something. Sometimes some people report forgetting because it's been suggested to them, even the fact that they've been hypnotized. That's very controversial, of course. Some say that's not the case, and the person is just choosing to behave in that way, and others say, no, it really can't happen. So depends on how you look at it. So here's a good example of age regression. I know my name is Steve, but this is not me, but I thought that was funny. So this is Steve as an adult, and this is Stephen when he was age regressed. Sue as an adult, Sue age regressed. So the main changes in hypnotized people, they have a tendency not to begin actions on their own. There's redistributed attention. They have an enhanced ability to fantasize. They're readily take on different roles depending on what those might be because, you know, they want to be hypnotized. They're being cooperative with it. But they also have reduced reality testing, meaning they're not entirely aware of their present surroundings under hypnosis. One theory of hypnosis is there's a state theory of hypnosis. There's changes in a person's brain activity. They have dramatic effects on the body. There's been examples where a person's actually been hypnotized and their pain level can go down. I have been trained in hypnosis, and one of the things that I have used hypnosis before is working with chronic pain sufferers. And I've actually been able to help people experience various levels of pain and reduce their pain dramatically through hypnosis. There's been instances where people have used hypnosis to get rid of warts, believe it or not. Warts just fall off their body. It's really fascinating. There's a non-state theory of hypnosis, a role theory, meaning you're there, you want to be hypnotized, and so you accept your role and you cooperate with it. Or the dissociation theory. Dissociation is a naturally occurring altered state of consciousness that we all have at some level. If you have ever daydreamed before, or you've ever experienced what's known as highway hypnosis, you know, you're driving along a very familiar route, you're heading back home, and you suddenly find yourself on a road, and you know you're heading home, but it's a little bit different. You're don't quite remember when you turned off on this road. You know you have to make a turn to get on this road, but you don't remember turning off on it. That's a form of disassociation that a person sometimes might experience. So this is really fascinating. So like this is a good example of the intensity of pain that's reported in people with chronic pain. There's normal waking pain. There's pain indicated by the automatic key pressing. This person is the hidden observer, and then there's the pain indicated by the verbal report of the person following hypnosis. So, you know, again, pain is very subjective, and lots of people have noticed that pain can be readily controlled through hypnosis. As we said, pain relief is an application of hypnosis. The elimination of side effects of chemotherapy, nausea can be controlled. The speed of post-operative recovery can be improved. Reduce stress-related hair loss, which I should have done a long time ago. Recovery of lost memories, that's very controversial though. I would not put a whole lot of validity into memories that are recovered under hypnosis, because people can confabulate memories. People who are hypnotized can be highly suggested to remember something that happened when it didn't actually happen. So false memories are definitely able to be implanted under hypnosis. So you have to be careful with going down that route. Meditation is a good example of an altered state of consciousness. Mindfulness is a form of meditation, and it can improve a variety of both mental and physical health conditions. So psychoactive drugs, how do drugs affect the brain? So as we talked about earlier, things like caffeine and alcohol are definitely mind-altering substances. There's plenty of others that are out there. Honestly, almost anything that you ingest, including food that you ingest, alters your brain chemistry on some level. It might be very slight, it might be very strong. So it just depends on what that might be. But most psychoactive drugs change consciousness and other psychological processes. Most alter the interactions between neurotransmitters and the receptors. They often will cross the blood-brain barrier, and the effects depends on several factors. There's a lot of new research that's going on now with researching psychoactive drugs that are hallucinogens. So like LSD, psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, ketamine, which has the street name for ketamine is Special K, or it used to be back in my day. I don't know if that's still the street name. But all of those drugs are hallucinogens that appear to have a very positive effect on a person's mood regulation, including depression. And where drugs like Prozac might take weeks to kick in, there's been a lot of studies to suggest that both psilocybin, for example, and ketamine have immediate, within an hour or less, ability to dramatically alter a person's subjective experience of depression, which is miraculous. And hopefully that can bring some of those drugs to the market and help people in a quicker way with those sorts of things. So in psychoactive drugs, you have agonists and antagonists. So like, for example, here's what happens naturally. You have a neurotransmitter that fits into the receptor site and causes a neurotransmission. So here's a drug acting as an agonist, that the drug actually takes the spot that normally would be taken up by the neurotransmitter and does the same job as the neurotransmitter. That's an agonist. It activates the neuro receiver in the nerve, in the neurons. An antagonist is a drug that takes the spot or the slot and prevents the neurotransmitter or blocks the neurotransmitter from activating the nerve. And so in this case, the nerve is not allowed to be activated and it's blocked. There's a drug that you can give people for opiate overdoses that is an antagonist that blocks opiate drugs from activating the endorphin receptor sites in the brain and prevents an overdose. So there's varying effects of drugs. Drug abuse can be a big issue, especially in college-age kids who begin experimenting. A lot of studies have shown that people may experiment with drugs in their adolescence or their youth, but then let it go and don't become dependent upon it. So drug abuse and drug dependence are two different things. There can be a psychological dependence on some drugs, even though there may not be a physiological dependence. If you do have a physiological dependence on the drug, then that is a true addiction, and a person may experience withdrawal and even drug tolerance. Opiate drugs are notorious for their addictive abilities and their physiological dependence that they create in their in the substance user. There may be epigenetic factors that affect relapse. Some people may just be more prone to seeking out novel experiences, and so then they're more prone to addiction than others. Or you may have learned expectations regarding certain drugs. People who are long-term addicts tend to become experts in their drug of choice on some level, and they know how it reacts to them. Examples of depressant drugs we had talked about: alcohol, barbiturates, GHB are all good examples of depressants that lower the arousal level of the brain. Stimulating drugs increase the arousal level of the brain. Drugs like amphetamines, most of the medicines for ADHD are in the amphetamine stimulant family. Cocaine is a stimulant, caffeine, nicotine found in cigarettes, or even ecstasy is a stimulating drug. They're experimenting now with ecstasy. MDMA is actually on the fast track for approval, believe it or not, for the FDA in the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. They have found that when you use MDMA coupled with psychotherapy, it tends to have a profoundly positive effect on reducing post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD symptoms. So that's very beneficial and amazing. Opiates can induce sleep and relieve pain. Highly addictive. We're in the middle of an opiate crisis on some level. Examples of opiates are opium, morphine, heroin, and codeine, which I am terribly allergic to the opiate family of drugs. I can't take them at all, even prescription drugs. I get really sick with them. So I would be a very bad heroin addict. Hallucinating drugs, we talked about that a little. Marijuana is technically classified in the hallucinogenic drug area, although you have to smoke a lot of it. I heard in order to experience the hallucinogenic effects of that. LSD and ketamine, we talked about a little bit. So here's the major classes of psychoactive drugs and what it does to you. This is a neat little chart you can review at your leisure some point. And I think we're at the end of our slides. Are there any questions about tonight's lecture?
So it's disassociation, altered state of consciousness, right?
Correct. Disassociation is a kind of altered state of consciousness. Absolutely. So, examples of a dissociation might be a hypnotic state, daydreaming, Howie hypnosis, all of those are examples of disassociation. Extreme examples are like multiple personality disorder, currently known as dissociative identity disorder. That's an extreme version of a dissociative state. And we'll get into some of that later on in the semester. Any other questions tonight? All right, I'm around if you need me. Thanks everybody for coming to tonight's lecture. Very interesting, one of my favorite topics. I love talking about consciousness and all the stuff that goes along with it. It's always so fascinating. If you need anything, let me know. Otherwise, have a great evening, and I will see you next week, next Thursday.
Yeah, have a great evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.